And we're going.
Going?
Yep. Hi.
You're listening to...
Yeah, I know. You're listening to Better Conversations with Derek and Carrie, where we talk about money, marriage, and quitting your job.
We had turkey for dinner last night. On this episode of the Conversations podcast here, we are on a walk in an undisclosed location in Oklahoma. And we're going to go back in time and talk about the previous life that we used to live, where we had jobs, real jobs. And I'm going to tell the story about how we decided to quit and how all that went down, and the plans that we made, and the joy and the laughter and the tears and the sorrow. And then we're going to do a really cool thing. We're going to answer listener questions. I put out in a few Facebook groups that we were going to do this, that we were going to talk about this, and asked for your questions. And we got a whole lot of really, really good questions, and I'm very excited to answer your questions. So I'm going to tell the story, and then Carrie is going to feed me those questions. And Amelie, what are you going to do?
This is baby Amelie.
What are you going to do, Amelie?
She's just chilling. I'm listening.
We're pushing Amelie in our stroller, in her stroller here. Okay, so in a former life, I had a real job. I started my first real-world job a week after I graduated college, and I worked there for 5.5 years. At first, it was okay, I was a little intimidated by having my first real-world job, which I think people can relate to, maybe. And it was okay, but then after about the first year, we'll say, it became very clear to me that, wow, I'm not so sure how I feel about this. And I let it drag on for another 4.5 years. And during that time, it just got to be way too much. It was just not right for me. There was nothing wrong with the job itself, the people I worked with, or the company. It just wasn't. During that time, I gained a little bit of weight. I had my entire right leg hurt all of the time, which was really weird, the whole thing. I developed a knot in my left shoulder that was there all the time for like years. It felt like a muscle in my left shoulder was on fire all of the time. I can't stress that enough. I mean, months and months and months at a time. I threw out my back on the job. That was fun.
Were you 80?
No, I was like 26 at the time. I threw out my back. And the weirdest and maybe most telling thing that happened was I developed a case of shingles.
That's disgusting.
Which is awkward for me to admit. But shingles, I didn't even know what it was. Shingles is like, I was like, oh my God, is that like some sort of STD? No,
what?
It's not an STD. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like, oh man, she gave me some shingles. Anyway.
Oh my gosh.
Shingles is a re-emergence of the
chicken pox?
The chicken pox.
Which makes you wonder, why don't they just call it the chicken pox?
It's like because it re-emerges differently. We don't need to get into that.
Yeah, this is.
I had it, and it's caused, one of the things that can bring it on is stress, and that's what did it for me. Because check this out. Speaking of being old and throwing out your back, most of the time shingles doesn't develop in people until they're over 50. But if you're under 50, one of the causes is stress. And that's what did it for me. So I'm like, I have this job, I hate it, I'm miserable, I'm not happy.
You've got shingles.
I have shingles, I have thrown out my back, I've got all these issues. And then a friend of mine actually let me borrow a book, as I was telling a friend of mine how unhappy I was and how I wanted to quit and everything, but I just didn't have the courage to quit. So I held on, and it was awful. A friend of mine let me borrow a book called 48 Days to the Work You Love by Dan Miller. Highly recommend it. somewhere in that book, he asks this question: if the next 5 years of your life are the same as the last 5 years of your life, would you be okay with that? And I was like, no, I would not be okay with that. And so that caught my attention, and I'm thinking to myself, am I going to allow the next 5 years of my life to be just like the previous 5 years of my life? It was terrifying.
No.
It was terrifying to think about doing it all over again, because at the time I had been at the job for like just over 5 years, I think 5.5 years, something like that. So it was kind of the timing of it all was coincidental too. So I finally developed the courage to quit. Carrie and I, we were married, right? We had just gotten married.
Mm-hmm.
When I decided to, I was like, I have to quit. And Carrie was very encouraging.
Sorry about that. Kill Abraham.
Who's Kill Abraham?
He said he hates his job.
Oh, sorry, buddy. Keep listening. And we looked at our budget, and Carrie had a full-time job, and we figured with our expenses as low as they were, that we could live off of Carrie's salary alone for a year. And I was like, okay, that sounds safe enough to me. Let's do it. So I quit.
Because what are the chances that it would take more than a year to build up a business, right?
Which it did, which we'll talk about in part 2 of this series on quitting your job. So now I quit my job. That's been almost 4 years, right? 3.5 years? I can't keep up.
Yeah, 4.
4 years-ish, coming up on 4 years. And now Carrie is going to ask me some questions from the people of Facebook. We're going to...
And Periscope.
And Periscope questions. We're going to take your questions too. Any questions about, how I quit my job, what we're doing now, how is it going, all of that kind of stuff. Carrie?
Yeah.
Fire away.
All right, so we had some really great questions come in from Facebook, and we're going to talk mostly this episode about like leading up to quitting the job. So, Nikki Melodic Slattery says, "Did we quit at the same time, or did we stagger quitting? Because both of us have now quit our jobs, and we staggered it. Derek's was first. I worked full-time for a while after Derek quit and just supported us until he got his business going. Mark Dill, MBA of Periscope, says, what was our first year like? Derek, what was the first year like?
Well, so the first year, Carrie was still working full-time. I was at home in our apartment with no idea what I was doing. It took a year for me to get a clue as to what I was doing. We did not... We did not build up this business on the side, before I quit. I just straight up quit because I was in such an awful situation. I just had to get out, and luckily, like I said, we could live off Carrie's salary for at least a year. So it was almost as if, hey, I'll just, instead of building up a business on the side, I'll just do it full time because Carrie can support us full-time, and so that's what we did. What was the question?
What was the first year like?
So
it was hard.
It was very hard. I had no idea what I was doing. I wanted to start a business, basically a financial coaching business, and I did actually get my first. Remember, I got my first coaching client within a few months.
Yeah.
So that was really exciting, and then within a year, we started working on the first book. But then It took about another year for the first book to come out.
Disillusioned because we spent a lot of money in that first year on like learning how to run the business and everything. And
which was good.
It was, but at the same time, I think we were kind of under the impression that if we put in this time and money, then the business will just work.
Yeah.
And we didn't realize like how much work it was going to be.
Remember, I literally thought that people were going to be beating down my front door, begging for me to coach them. I was like, man, I'm gonna be like fully booked and people are just gonna love it. That's not quite how it went.
Okay, so that answers the question, Nikki's follow-up question, how much did we build up the business before quitting?
0.
Not
We
at
built
all.
it up 0 before I quit.
How much did we safely plan to pull out of savings for the first year?
Well, we planned on pulling out none because we budgeted out. We spent, hours and hours and hours and hours calculating how long we could live on your salary. Remember that?
Yeah.
And that's something that I would highly recommend, obviously. And that worked really well. And in fact, during that first year, we got to a place where we could actually live on your salary alone indefinitely. Don't you remember that? We made it through that first year and we were like, oh my gosh, we're fine. We could actually do this forever. It didn't turn out that way, but we could have. So we didn't take out of savings the first year, but we did take out of savings after that.
Every year after that.
Every year after that, yeah. Almost. No, not every year. Not every year, because when we were working for TV Talk,
Oh, right.
we didn't take out during that time.
Mark Dillon BA says, what were our goals and were we productive in the first year?
Man, I don't remember. Goals and were we productive the first year?
I think that our goals were kind of unrealistic for the first year, right?
I don't even remember what our goals were the first year, but was it productive? Yes and no, because we spent the first year learning what not to do, which was necessary.
Yeah.
It was all necessary to get to where we are now. We had to go through an entire year of having almost no clue what we were doing. That was in my opinion, that's one of the only ways that you can learn what you're doing, is to get out there and just absolutely screw up and feel like an idiot for a whole year and have no clue what you're doing. That's how we learned. I'm sure there's other ways.
Well, there are. We jumped in, head first. Hey, why are you doing that? Whereas a lot of people will, go part-time, which we didn't do. You could have worked on the side.
We did do that with your business, which we're going to talk about in a different episode. Carrie did build up her business part-time on the side and replaced her salary 100% before quitting. Right. So we did do it with you. We didn't do it with me.
Right. But that kind of leads into Tracy Lee's question. What were you scared about? What were we scared about?
Okay, I've got a good answer to that question. I was more scared of staying at my job than I was quitting and jumping out into the unknown.
Right.
Another year at my job was terrifying. It was so scary that I was going to quit with no plan, and I did. And so I guess, to more accurately answer that question, I guess I was scared of, I wasn't really scared because I was so excited. Remember? I was so excited about starting our own business and everything. I was just filled with excitement, so much that fear of failure or whatever just wasn't there during that time. But I suppose I would worry about, are we going to make it? Have I made a huge mistake? Am I an idiot? Should I be embarrassed? All of which I wasn't. I didn't think so. But sure, I was scared of failing and not making it and having to go get another job, but none of that stuff ever came true. I wasn't really that scared of it.
That kind of leads into Patrick McLeod's next question. And actually, Mark, if you could re-ask that question, I saw at the very end of it before it went away. But what advice would you give to yourself, knowing now what you know, that the year before you quit?
A year before I quit?
Yeah, and during that year leading up to it.
I would have worked it on the side.
You would have? Okay.
I probably would have tried to build it up a little bit more on the side, because you can learn, like I said, I basically spent a year having no clue what I was doing and just learning. Well, I could have learned, I could have saved half of that time and had no clue what I was doing and learned on the side for a year before I quit my job, I just would have put me that much further